there! My name is Bubbly. I'm a little unicorn on the internet using my art to spread joy and kindness. Today, I'm going to be yapping about my absolute favorite Christmas movie, How the Grinch Stole Christmas. But Bubbly, you may be screaming at your device. There's 3 versions. Which one are you talking about?
Oh, Zooble, you mismatched cash piano, I'll tear you!
The good one, obviously. Yep. I'm talking about Jim Carrey's How the Grinch Stole Christmas. This movie still has a chokehold on me, even though the movie is 25 years old. So today, I will be fangirling about the behind-the-scenes work that went on to make the movie, because I feel like more people need to know about it. Also, I'm just in a Christmassy mood, and I want to fangirl about this movie. So, let's set the scene. The year is 1999, and the director, Ron Howard, was trying to convince Dr. Seuss's widow, Audrey Geisel, to make a live-action version of How the Grinch Stole Christmas. At first, Audrey was hesitant because her late husband's art was too avant-garde for Hollywood. She was perfectly content with the animated version that came out in 1966. So why add to it? The first thing that Audrey needed to convince her to make the movie was the lead actor. Who in the world would play the Grinch? Producer Brian Grazer knew exactly who he wanted. Jim Carrey. I always saw Jim as the Grinch, notes Grazer. Jim is always at his best as an actor when he is proactive, when he animates, and when power is central to his character. So the intersection of what the Grinch is all about, thematically, and what Jim Carrey is about as a performer is a perfect combination. However, Audrey wanted to meet Jim Carrey to make sure he was fit for the role, which is completely fair. She wanted to make sure the integrity of her husband's work was intact throughout the whole process. She went to meet Jim Carrey on the set of Man on the Moon, and what transpired next was nothing short of a miracle. I was stunned. Without any makeup, he simply became the Grinch before my eyes, recalls Mrs. Geisel, who thinks her husband would have approved. Ted would have totally embraced Jim Carrey as the Grinch. Actually, they, Ted and Jim, are alike in many ways, and are 2 very unique individuals, said Mrs. Geisel. And with that, Jim Carrey was officially hired to play the Grinch. Obviously, Jim Carrey had to physically embody the Grinch, so multiple makeup tests were done. Trying to avoid the heavy makeup and prosthetics, they tried to paint Jim's face, but it came out looking more like someone from the cast of Cats. Jim Carrey ended up choosing the very first Grinch design that was drawn up. The makeup he chose was perfect because it allowed Jim to be able to emote every little micro expression he needed to embody the Grinch. The design of Whoville residence was also another hurdle that was difficult to overcome. The head of special effects, Rick Baker, couldn't go for a true live-action adaptation of the book because that would be way too scary. He knew that he needed to make the Who's more human-like. Thankfully, he did what could be adapted, the hairstyles. Whoville hairstyles were gravity-defying and very whimsical, and they created over 200 hair designs for the residents of Whoville. Dang, that's a lot of hair. For the child actors, they avoided breaking child labor laws by keeping the prosthetics to a minimum to avoid having to work too long on all the kids' makeup. Baker said his crew came up with the piece of lore that as they grow up, the kids get more Seussian or Who-like. However, before I move on to the set design, I do want to fangirl a little bit about the acting. Obviously, Jim Carrey knocks it out of the park with his version of the Grinch, but Cindy Lou's actress did so well. She really embodies the sweetness and innocence that her character represents in the story. When she giggles at the Grinch's antics, it feels genuine. And when she questions the meaning of Christmas, you can feel her yearning for the truth. Every expression from Taylor Momsen is absolute perfection. Speaking of perfection, I definitely think the costuming for this movie is outstanding and so unique. According to the book How the Grinch Stole Hollywood by Andy Lipschultz, nothing was bought. Everything from the costumes, the sets, and the props were all handmade. The head of costuming, Rita Ryack, had to come up with 400 costume designs in just 4 short months before filming, which, in my opinion, is absolutely insane. I know she had a team to help her, but still, that is so much. I admire the way she styled the Whoville residence, because she both stuck to the original illustrations of the book and expounded on them in such a unique way. Rita would first draw like Dr. Seuss to get a feel for how his designs worked. Then she would expound on them after being inspired by the 1950s magazine fashion. I'm not gonna lie, after learning that, it made me super excited because I too am constantly inspired by 1950s fashion. So the reason why I love the shapes and silhouettes of the outfits of this movie makes sense to me now. When it came to the costumes, Rita said, "I tried to evoke the feelings I had when I first read his books and the ambiance of that time. A 1950s Norman Rockwell television kind of world. I also wanted to remain within a kind of Technicolor palette and primary colors. In fact, for the clothes, the reds and the greens became neutrals." She was also inspired by Japanese fashion as well, especially when it came to the outfits on the school children, when Martha May was telling Cindy Lou about the Grinch. Also, something I noticed about the male teenagers is that they have a more Harajuku street fashion style, whereas the girl teens have a more Y2K vibe. But weirdly enough, those two work together really well. I absolutely love the costume design of this movie, and being able to learn about the process of it and how it came together is really so inspiring for me, especially since I'm a fashion designer myself. The fashion is only half of the world of Dr. Seuss, however. Michael Korenblith was in charge of set design, and he took his job very seriously. Unlike the fashion, Korenblith had very little to go off of when it came to the buildings and infrastructure of Whoville. So, Michael suggested to director Ron Howard that the set of Whoville be a celebration of Dr. Seuss's works throughout the years. What I wanted to do was pull something from the beginning, middle, and end of Seuss's career, says Korenblith. I think that is such a cool idea. He also, in studying the art of Dr. Seuss, he realized his art was inspired by the architectural art of Anton Gaudi and Moroccan and Islamic architecture. Finally, Michael had his inspiration, and once he showed Ron Howard the inspo and clay model of the building from Whoville, Ron knew this concept was going to work. What's really cool about the set of Whoville is that the inspiration was not just drawn from one place. For example, the apartment the old ladies lived in is based off of a New Orleans style apartment, whereas the town hall is based off of Greek Revival architecture. They first made sets out of clay to solidify the designs, and then used styrofoam to make the actual buildings, which makes complete sense. According to the book, the Whoville set was built over the course of 18 weeks on stage 12 at 30,000 square feet with 50-foot ceilings, the largest on the Universal lot. Every bit of space was used. The buildings were constructed out of styrofoam over a steel armature, which was then covered with 8 different applications of plaster. Dang, that's a lot of plaster. What's crazy about these designs is that there were no right angles used in the construction of major set pieces, which is totally insane. The sets also had to be practical with opening and closing doors, and some of the buildings, like the department store, had a major curve, so having working doors was almost impossible, but somehow they made it work. They also had to build an entirely different lighting system in order to preserve the decorative flooring that was the foundation of the entire set. The lighting was too heavy to move across the floor, so they ended up spending 2 months figuring out what to do for the lighting. What they ended up doing was putting all the lights on 2,200 channels that were controlled by a single dimmer board. And also the 52,000 Christmas lights that decorated the Whoville buildings lit the buildings perfectly. So the lighting worked out in the end. I honestly think the coolest thing about this movie is the fact that they used practical props. Not only that, but they also used things found in thrift stores to craft unique looking items, such as the microphone used by the mayor or the blabbercorder, used by Cindy Lou to interview the old ladies. To keep the scenes looking timeless, the crew tried not to use any materials invented after 1957. Making the props and furniture was a huge undertaking. There was a purposeful randomness, though, to how they designed the props. Sometimes the prop would have, like a Seussian look to it, and other times a kettle was just a kettle. The props had to be cartoon-like, but also functional. It couldn't look too out of place if a person from Whoville was holding it. Earlier, I mentioned that they went to vintage stores to make props. Here's a couple of examples of what props were made of. The Grinch's answering machine was made from a 1940s Kirby vacuum cleaner, a kitchen strainer, and a porcelain sink handle, amongst other things. The Grinch's telescope was a combination of a camera tripod leg, a mannequin leg, a rain gutter, and a brass sextant, giving it that homemade feeling that it was made from garbage. If the props weren't difficult enough, the cars would also be a real challenge. Each car started from a base frame of a golf cart. Then they would sculpt the cars from that frame into the round Seussian car that we all know and love. Each car took 2 to 4 weeks to make. Then it took another 2 weeks to make the mold, 2 to 3 more weeks assembling the vehicle, and then 1 week giving it a lustrous paint job. Lustrous paint job. There were 11 cars total on the set of How the Grinch Stole Christmas, but the amount of work did not stop the cast and crew from taking them for a joyride around the studio. What I wouldn't give to ride in one of those cars. That would be so much fun. The amount of work that went into this movie is absolutely mind-blowing, and I genuinely loved looking into this movie and how it was made. So much manpower and creativity went into this absolute work of art, and I really think they captured the Seuss-like world building that you find in the books. Honestly, I think this is one of the best Dr. Seuss adaptations since. There just hasn't been one since The Grinch Stole Christmas that have really lived up to my expectations. The last thing I want to talk about is a personal favorite of mine, the message of the movie. Sure, you could say that it's a movie about appreciating the people around you and call it a day, but that's only the surface level, at least in my opinion. I want to talk about why the Grinch crashes out, both at the school and during the jubilation. I honestly think that the misunderstanding that the Grinch has about Christmas is genius, because that is a common mistake most people make when thinking about Christmas. We get so lost in thinking about what to get for someone, when in reality, those things fade. The Grinch was also raised in an environment where they put more emphasis on how the present made you look to everyone else rather than giving from the heart. The classroom scene really established how the Who's made homemade presents and really solidified the Grinch's hate of Christmas. His hatred of the Who's makes complete sense when you put yourself in his shoes. His little too tight shoes. It's not just about him being bullied, although that is a part of it. It's that he finally showed an interest in something, and it was completely shut down. Now, the Grinch isolating himself was definitely an overreaction, but what he did is what most kids do when their interests get made fun of. They isolate themselves. He wanted to keep himself from getting hurt again. When Cindy Lou enters the picture, she's questioning the same thing that the Grinch was all those years ago. She keeps asking these questions that no one else is asking. Why do we do this? What's the purpose? But she kept getting brushed off, so all she could do was harbor those feelings and wrestle with them alone, which is something that the Grinch also had to do. However, Cindy Lou, out of desperation, asks the Grinch to go to the jubilation because she knows that if no one ever tries to include him, he wouldn't ever make peace with them. Talking about the Whoville people. She has the simple want for the Grinch to be included because he showed her that he genuinely does have a heart. The important distinction is that he is flawed. The Grinch did terrible things that caused chaos, but he never went out of his way to be genuinely evil. Cindy realized that there was a possibility to redeem him, so she invited him. Fast forward to the jubilation, and he has a genuinely good time. He spends time with people that were wary of him at first, but then started to warm up to him. At that point, he is so close to finding out the true meaning of Christmas, and maybe even being accepted into Whoville again. But then the mayor ruins it by giving him a razor. And even worse, he pressures Martha May into marrying him with nice things. And that brought the Grinch to his breaking point. He then goes into his monologue, which points out the hypocrisy of the Who's. The only reason they give presents to each other is to manipulate and brag to each other about the nice things that they have. It's all a competition to them, and it's not a very fair one either. And then he points out that the stuff that they do get eventually ends up with him in the trash. And then he points out that the stuff they do get, they eventually end up with him in the trash. He points out that all of this means nothing and that they are just participating in an endless cycle of consumption. It takes a shunned outsider like the Grinch to finally reveal the reason why Christmas feels so pointless to both him and Cindy Lou. The focus wasn't on the people that they were spending time with, which is priceless. It was the presents and the decorations, all of which could break or be replaced in a few years. But people are irreplaceable. And Christmas is about spending time with them. And I do genuinely love that the Grinch finally learns at the end what it's all about. The people. But the true reason for Christmas was the ultimate gift that was given to us, which is just as irreplaceable as our loved ones, Jesus. He came down to earth as a humble baby to spread the good news about salvation. He came down to redeem us. All of us are terrible people. All of us have been like the Grinch in some way. Petty, angry, and bitter. But Jesus is the true reason for Christmas, and I'm eternally grateful that he gave his life for me to live for an eternity with him in heaven. Looking into this movie has really inspired me artistically. I genuinely loved looking into how this movie came together and learning about how everything was made, from the costumes to the smallest props. I really enjoyed yapping about my favorite Christmas movie. Every year, this movie fills me with the joy and warmth of Christmas, and I hope this video makes people appreciate it just a little bit more. For this video, I used the book How the Grinch Stole Hollywood by Andy Lipschultz. I will link a free PDF version of it in the description because it's a really interesting read. I was so happy to come across it in my search because it was the perfect thing I needed to do my research for this video. Also, if you enjoyed any of the art that I drew during this video, please feel free to check out my Etsy. My art will definitely put a smile on you or a loved one's face. If you learned anything new in this video, feel free to like, subscribe, and maybe leave a comment. So until next time, make some friends and be kind. See you later!